All right, I think we're live here, but we're going to change the title. Folks, I'm here with Charlie Cooper. He is with Get Money Out Maryland. Sorry, we got a little bit of a slow start this morning, but problems with the tech so often besets us. And I was very disappointed, Charlie, because yesterday there were zero issues and everything was working perfectly. I assumed it would be the same today. Famous last words, of course. Welcome to Halitics, Charlie Cooper of Get Money Out Maryland.
Thank you, Hal. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, I guess I'm a little bit of an unlucky charm here. But at any rate, so yes, we've been doing Get Money Out Maryland since 2013. So we're coming up on 10 years. And we have signed up something like 10,000 Marylanders in our continuing organizing and mobilizing to call attention to the corruption of big money in politics. And currently, we are convening the For the People Maryland Coalition with 28 other organizations, including Our Revolution Maryland. So thank you, Our Revolution. And we're doing a variety of things to try to push the agenda forward. So we had several years where we pursued a controversial strategy in the Maryland General Assembly, and it just did not work out. And so we've been trying to help pass legislation through Congress and through the Maryland General Assembly, and also just educate the public.
So what didn't work? What were you trying to accomplish? I assume you're continuing to try to accomplish this at Get Money Out Maryland, part of the
Right.
For the People Coalition. Your goal remains the same. Your strategy has morphed. Explain.
Right. So we latched on to a strategy of overturning the Citizens United decision of the Supreme Court, the 2010 decision that corporations could spend unlimited money to influence elections and politics. And our idea was to overturn it using an amendment to the US Constitution. And the US Constitution has two ways that an amendment can be proposed. The first way everybody's familiar with, which is that 2/3 of each House of Congress have to agree on the language, and then they send the language to the states for ratification, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. But the second way is that 2/3 of the state ask for a convention at which the states would attend and would could, if they could agree, propose an amendment. And this strategy has been used many, many times, but it's never led to a convention. The Constitution says that if 2/3 of the states ask for the convention, the Congress must call the convention. And it was actually implicated in creating the Bill of Rights, because immediately after the Constitution was ratified, the two biggest states, New York and Virginia, started asking for a convention. And so the Congress proposed the Bill of Rights. Our idea mainly was to use the leverage of the idea of a state convention to force the Congress to propose an amendment to limit money in politics, to guarantee every citizen's right to vote, and to make sure that corporations do not have constitutional rights. But what happened is that liberal Washington-based groups are very, very afraid of the convention strategy because people on the right have tried to use it. They have never been able to have a convention, but they've gotten more states to sign up than the left has. I think it's very foolish to throw away an organizing strategy, but what the mainstream liberal groups have been doing is raising money by citing fears of a right-wing convention, and they call it the runaway convention.
Well, it's not wholly groundless, right? I mean, it's not inconceivable. And your concern, really, Charlie, is the money, right? Is that the money is polluting politics, and even it's preventing. It's a very significant concern that it will also prevent there from being a meaningful constitutional reform
It's a
convention.
vicious cycle where the right out-organized the rest of the country, starting with the Powell memo in 1973. Business interests got organized. They created think tanks. They endowed university chairs. They took over law schools, essentially, and other kinds of university departments by contributing money. They have great influence over the mainstream news media. And so having all this influence in all these realms, they have succeeded in getting the laws more and more to their liking, especially the tax laws. And so this has enabled them to accumulate even more wealth. And then they have more ability to spend a very, very teeny share of their profits on influencing politics. So
Right.
one of the things,
it's a terrible vicious cycle. Obviously,
yeah,
we've got to get it out. Now, just let's be clear, because when you talk about liberals, we're talking about both parties, right? I mean, both parties are corrupt. Both parties, and correct me if you disagree with what I'm saying, and I'm not saying they're equally bad, but ultimately both parties are dancing this pas de mal, or whatever we want to call it, this evil dance that is leading us to an ever worse place.
absolutely. Both parties are in the game, and the game is big corporate money in one guise or another, and they're all forms of it. The dark money is starting to increase and increase, as I predicted it would.
All right,
And
so give us
something
your
to keep in
website.
mind
Go ahead.
is that the total amount, before Citizens United, a national campaign for the presidency might cost a few $1 billion. Here, the last one cost $15 billion. Now we've had a midterm that costs almost that same amount. And people are saying, oh my God, so much money. If you're trying to run for Congress, you need a couple $1 million. If you're trying to challenge an incumbent, you may need more than that, unless you have really, really good grassroots support. So that seems like a lot of money. Corporate profits, however, in a 2-year cycle are coming up on 5 trillion. So 15 billion as a percentage of 5 trillion is, I don't exactly know, but it's like 1/3 of 1% or something. It's nothing. When the corporations and the corporate interests and the right-wing ideologues spend money on politics, they're spending the kind of money you spend on an ice cream soda.
All right, we're talking to Charlie Cooper from Get Money Out Maryland and For the People Coalition. We're talking about the corrupting influence, the all-corrupting influence of money on our politics, on the politicians themselves, and why, the old, I guess it's sort of a new paradigm, why we can't have good things. Because the politicians are getting a little bit of that enormous pie. They're getting a little slice of it, while the corporate behemoths and the captains of industry collect almost all of it for themselves. Now, right. The reason I invited Charlie to be on this program, Halitics, by the way, it's at the Halitics is my channel. And I want you to like and subscribe. The more subscriptions, then I can start to actually monetize this, and then I have to go back and get a real job. And that's really the whole point. So please do like and subscribe at Halitics. Charlie's my first live guest. I had some great friends from Monterey on as we were testing out the system, but Charlie has the great honor, and it is quite an honor indeed, for Charlie Cooper to be my first guest in Halitics, a great friend as well, and a great progressive. I actually invited him on, and we're going to segue now. to talk about the strategy to make things better. And I just put up on the screen there the next, and we'll make that a little bit of a more legible slide. Why I wanted Charlie on, because we have a disagreement over how to move forward, not in terms of getting money out of politics. We agree it has to. We cannot progress with money controlling politics, but on a broader scope, Charlie, can we reform the Democratic Party? Can we reform it without taking the money out? And if we do take the money out, can we reform the Democratic Party?
Yes. So I did disagree with something Hal said when we were having an email exchange among local Our Revolution leaders. But I guess I would like to say I'm fairly agnostic on chickens and eggs. In other words, do we have to take the money out first? Well, it would be great. But I think the answer, if you look at history in the long term, is we don't know. So my grandparents came to this country around 1900, all four of them, and some of them had to work in a factory, so they were making 10 cents an hour or something, working 55-hour weeks. And how did that change? It changed because of the labor movement. Now, it also changed because a guy named Franklin D. Roosevelt became president, and he was amenable to listen to them, and they were pretty relentless in continuing to organize and strike and win things. And that combination of a mass grassroots movement from the bottom and a political leader who was not a complete tool of the ruling class is how change happens. So getting money out of politics is a systemic reform, whereas something like, say, increasing the minimum wage is a substantive reform. That is, it responds to what people are really, really worried about is, can I buy my bus pass next month? Can I pay the rent? Can I keep the lights on? And about half the people in this country have worries like that.
Exactly. And in fact, the situation that your great or grandparents faced when they came to this country is really no different than that faced by many people who come to this country today, who are working countless hours, 2 jobs, 3 jobs to barely survive, to pay, as you just mentioned, the rent and keep the lights on. So truly, over 100+ year period, I don't know that we've made any progress whatsoever. Indeed, the income and wealth disparities are greater now than they were in the Gilded Age. So
I don't think so. But anyway,
well, that's
they're
what
bad. They're horrible bad, and we got to fix them. And if we don't fix them, one thing I truly believe is that this ruling class has no idea what to do. They're not using it to stave off climate catastrophe. They're not using it to reduce the prospects of an accidental nuclear war that could kill 5 billion people. And they're clueless.
They're exacerbating the risks that we face.
Right.
If you look at this story, so that we've had successes, we've had political successes, and I don't want to minimize in any way what the 2 Roosevelt presidents did. The first one being the trust buster, taking real wealth and power away from the industrialists. The second Roosevelt truly redistributing wealth in a way that created a vibrant, ongoing middle class. But we've clearly seen a major slide back since after the presidency of LBJ in terms of wealth and income distribution, and certainly in terms of militarism. So it's hard to see that the strategy of transforming the Democratic Party, well, we've had great successes and we've improved millions of lives. At times, we've also now backslided. And if you look at the failure in Nevada, I thought this story was so interesting because Judith Whitmer elected progressive in Nevada, and now she's she's reviled on all sides. And one of the major accusations against her, she's a poor fundraiser. So money is the key, Charlie. We've got to get it out.
Well, I've been working on
transforming
that.
the party.
I
Oh, I
agree. It
know
would
you
be
are.
great to get it out, but I have to say I'm agnostic on whether I believe a good change is coming. I
Why?
hope it
Against
comes.
all,
I hope it
against
comes
what
before that
evidence?
accidental
What
nuclear war.
evidence is there that you think that things are going to get better? Every single Democrat, the progressive wing of the progressive wing, the squad, every last one voted for Hakeem Jeffries to be the minority leader. Every one of them, I believe, maybe one or two exceptions, voted in favor of the bloated Pentagon budget, as great as the one that Trump, bigger than the one that
Trump.
more than
Yes.
Trump demanded. In Maryland, we elected a Democratic governor, and he just appointed a natural gas guy to his energy team. So I mean, I'm not trying to be difficult. We're trying to come to some answers, I think. How can we look at the Democratic Party and say there's any way this organization, which, by the way, and let me see if I can get this next quote here. No, that's my reparations debate. So I don't have the quote, but the DSA accuses the Democratic Party now of being a dead end. How is that not clearly the case?
Well, let me just say, okay. So, as I said, I'm a little bit agnostic as to whether it will be substantive issues like the distribution of wealth and income, medical care, or whether it will be system reforms like getting money out of politics. If the one happens, the other will happen. Either way, okay. I'm 75 years old. I've been doing work like this for quite a while, and I continue to learn. But when I look back at history and I look how concentrated wealth was in the Gilded Era, and what happened after World War I, all over Europe and North America, progressive taxes were put in. And it went a long way to correct the wealth and income disparity. Now we've led it to where it's almost as bad or as bad as it was then. So I believe that people eventually will rise up and make a change somehow. And we don't know how it is. Our job as political activists is to keep organizing and keep educating. Now, in the case of money in politics, everybody, I mean, 80–90% of people understand the problem, and they agree with our ideas that there has to be a constitutional amendment, that we shouldn't have this dark money. But of course, the problem is the politicians follow the funders so far. At some point, if the people get riled up enough, the politicians will have to stop following the funders because they won't be elected. And the media are very good at distracting people, with Ron DeSantis and his deriding the concept of wokeness and all that kind of stuff.
It's personality. It's personality politics.
It's everything to take your mind off the fact that these folks are stealing your wages. At Get Money Out Maryland, we tried to calculate how much is the ruling class stealing from the average working person. And we know it's an underestimate, but we come up with $6,000 a person. In other words, a family of four, if we had a reasonably equitable society, a family of four would have an additional $24,000. So why do I think that working to change the Democratic Party is the way to go? Well, one thing I think is that trying to create a third party is a complete dead end in the United States for the following reason. The two parties have chiseled in stone the supremacy of two parties by the laws they've created, by the statute books of the 50 states. And I've spent when Get Money Out Maryland was focused primarily on the Maryland General Assembly. In addition to working for the constitutional amendment resolution, which, by the way, did pass in both chambers, but never in the same year, I sat in and testified on hundreds of election bills, and I, read the election code, and there's so many provisions that lock the two parties into place in the Maryland statute books, and I assume it's the same in Rhode Island and Wyoming and California. It's very, very difficult to organize a third party. And then if you do have a third party, it needs to have money. It needs to get on the ballot in 50 states, and that's not cheap. And then once it has money, is it going to be a pro working person party?
All right, let me push back. Couple three things. One, the most radical change this country has ever seen, arguably, and maybe, some might say FDR, I think it was during the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, when we actually fought a war to end slavery. Now, that some people argue, well, that wasn't really the purpose of the war, but most of the historians at the time, and certainly future President Ulysses S. Grant, the general of the armies, did say that was the reason for the war. And so did Sherman. That war happened because of a third party. The Republican Party was a third party that arose from the ashes of the Whig Party. The Whig Party had been, like the Democratic Party, a national party. It consisted of both slave owners as well as some abolitionists. Ultimately, that could not hold. It is exactly what you see with the Democratic Party, which includes industrialists, which includes the elites, as well as it continues to try to appeal to working people. That is not going to hold. Their interests are not aligned. So if we saw the greatest radical change ever occurred out of came because of a calcified political system, a calcified two-party system that could not, in fact, bring about change. Why is that different than now? And let me just throw this out. When you look at the efforts we've made, and we have worked really hard, and you have certainly been, Charlie, there to say how your work, my work, Charlie's work has made a difference. We've had successes in terms of electing people who certainly appeared to be progressive. And yet we find out once they become entrenched in Washington, rather than they changing Washington, Washington seems to change them. Given that history, what would cause you to think we're better off trying to organize people to vote for Democrats rather than vote for a third, I would say the Green Party?
So I think your example, I totally agree with your example, except that to me, the lesson is you have to replace one of the parties. If you want to found a new party, your goal can't be to be a third party. It's just not, it's stacked against you to be a third party. You have to be the second party. So you have to figure out which party you're going to get rid of. Or maybe you don't figure it out. You just create a party. To create that party, I don't know the history, I have to admit, but I can only imagine that there were some wealthy Northern industrialists that helped found the Republican Party back in the 1850s or whenever it happened. And that, there were Quakers who were wealthy merchants who were part of that abolitionist movement, and they must have been involved. Right now, the Green Party, for example, just doesn't have anything like the kind of financial backing that it would take to overcome the barriers that the 50 states have put up to the third party. But so I'm not opposed to a new party. If it's a serious new party with a chance to become the second party, I'm all for that, but we don't have that now. So therefore, to me, the thing that's right in front of us and what I'm seeing here, so recently our revolution tried to get the Democrats to ban dark money in primaries, and and it didn't work, but they made an attempt. There might come a year when it works. Um, um, and on the other hand, we've just seen Senator Sanders lead 71 members of Congress to urge Biden to give rail workers sick days. So the lead House members on the letter are Jamal Bowman, Rashida Tlaib, Ocasio-Cortez, Bush, and Donald Payne. So, that is something that members of Congress can do. I would say before the Bernie Sanders movement, you couldn't get 5 members of Congress to write a letter like that. It doesn't mean we're winning, but it does mean that there's a pressure on the Democrat Party. And I think if you watched Biden's State of the Union speech, you will see he rejected 40 years of neoliberalism in the speech. Now, whether it's really going to come to fruition, I mean, he talked about getting rid of bank junk fees and ending Ticketmaster's monopoly. These are things that haven't been discussed for 40 years. And here you have the president of the United States, who, Lord knows, is really, really bad on foreign affairs and so-called defense, military spending. But he's feeling pressure from us. That's the way I see it.
Well, I hope you're right. I'm not optimistic. And last point, and then I got to let you go, Charlie. It is now 11:30 here. We've kept Charlie on a little longer than we expected to because he's so erudite and he provides really good insights. And I'm all about on Halitics disagreement. We're trying to get to some kind of truth here, and speaking into an echo chamber, talking to yourself, that doesn't get us there. And especially when you talk with people who have similar goals, a truly just society, a society where everyone has interesting, remunerative work. Nobody is too poor. Nobody's sleeping under bridges at the same time. Nobody is too wealthy. I think our goals are the same. The question is, how do we get there? And even there, we're pretty much aligned. I do not disagree. We should vote for progressive Democrats when we have an opportunity. Charlie, will vote for Green Party candidates whenever they're the best candidate and there's any shot they can win. It's just a question of which is the ultimately going to prevail. And I think we both are. He's more optimistic than I am that one of them will succeed. I'm not particularly about it going in either direction. But I would say if we could organize people to really en masse go for a third party, I would love to see that happen. But how do we even do that, Charlie? How do we, you're saying we see things eye to eye. I don't even think, and you mentioned our evolution. Of course, I've been a staffer there for years. An organizer. I'm moving away from that group at this point to focus on this live stream, this video cast. How do we get people united when we can't even agree that we shouldn't be funding this war to the last Ukrainian? I mean, you and I are on the same page there, I believe.
Right.
But there are so many progressives who have been distracted by, Putin's so evil. It's like to me, it reminds me of nothing more than 1984, where the permanent war between Eurasia, East Asia, and Oceania, and Goldstein is this great evil who has been replaced by Putin. How we see it the same way. How do we unite progressives when lots of progressives are for this war to the last Ukrainian?
Well, we better not get into that. That is the thicket, and I do work on that, and I talk to my Congress people, etc., without a whole lot of effect. But what I what I would say here is, if you really want to make an effective third party, then somebody has to take apart the 50 state statute books and find out what you need to do to win from Alaska to Florida and from Maine to Hawaii. And then you need to say what that's going to cost to do that. How do you get on the ballot? How do you stay on the ballot? How do you create organizing committees all over the country in precincts? I just think right now, our revolution, as frustrating as it is a lot farther along in doing that thing within the Democratic Party than any third party is at doing it to become the second party.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we lost, and again, I'll give you the final word on this, Charlie, and ask you if you can be brief to be brief. I think what we lost a little momentum when this quote People's Party unquote was formed a few years ago by Nick Brana, a former staffer for Bernie Sanders. And I believe he was also closely involved with our revolution. And I was very disappointed at the time. This wasn't like a late bloomer. I said, why do you need to create this new party? You've got the Green Party. You've got people. Let's, coalesce behind a group that shares almost, 100% the same values. And instead they spend a lot of time and energy trying to get people to join this People's Party. And they, as far as I know, they've never run a candidate.
Yeah, well, that's a sad story. The most important thing is that people with a vision like us keep contact with the working people and keep educating them and keep getting them involved in struggles that are relevant to our lives. There are many ways to do that. There are many groups doing that all over the country. Working Families Party, Stand Up America. There's just lots of it going on. There's, the Starbucks Union, the Amazon Union, and many, many, many other union activities. And the rail workers that are continuing to fight for their sick leave. So we should be supporting those struggles, and we should be participating. And as I say again, big events happen, and they caught so sadly enough, what created the opportunity for FDR was the Depression. So that's a huge event that's outside the control of Hal and Charlie and everyone listening to this. But then if we've done our work and laid our base and have enough links and organizational power, then when these big events happen, we can come in and change the dialogue.
All right. I want to thank you so much, Charlie Cooper, joining me from the People Get Money Out Maryland. And you see the website there. I posted it, getmoneyoutmd.org. And let's move on to our next topic. I'm going to see if I can thank Charlie, and I've not got the right look there at all. So let me get, there we go. We'll transition out from Charlie. Okay. And there I am. We're going to see if we can also got a little bit of technical stuff here going on, but pretty much got it again. Thanks so much, Charlie, for being the first guest, the first live guest on Halitics. And there goes Charlie. We will see if we can, there we go. We got that. So I want to move on to my next topic. And this is going to be like all of our topics. It's going to be controversial. Or not all of them are controversial. This will be. I want to talk about the reparations movement. There's a story in the Washington Post, and to me, I think this is folly. I do not see the value of what they are trying to do. Well, I see the reason for it, but this goes to the whole issue, and we've talked about this many, many times, of functionalism and what functionalism is, why something happens. What is its function? If its function is not, and this went to that question yesterday of bias training, implicit bias training. Why do we have implicit bias training if it really makes things worse? And this is what we were talking about with the doctor in the Washington Post, who said, I oppose it because it sends all sorts of bad messages. It doesn't help the people it's designed to help. So what is the function of implicit bias training? It is to foment discord. It's to cause anger. It's to not to make change. It's to stymie change. And tragically, that is, in my view, to a very significant degree, what we see with the reparations movement as well. I'm not saying there aren't good people in the reparations movement. And we're talking about reparations for slavery, for racism, for the injustices done to African Americans over many generations. I'm not arguing that aren't good people there. I think there are. But I also think there are some grifters. And I also think that in the end, the purpose, the function, why we have this movement for reparations is because it stops change. It prevents meaningful movement forward. It prevents a better society from emerging from one that is truly unjust at the current time. So let me see if I can get this slide show up here, or my next slide. Let's see if we can get it. And this is in San Francisco, what they're debating. And again, look, we're working on the tech issue. We're going to get better and better as time goes on. Like Halitics, subscribe, like this video, right? Because you like the video and you subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to Halitics. We're going to get more and more. And we're going to take your calls too. If you want to join me now, 240-283-7262. I'm going to go ahead and share this slide. Now, this is from the Washington Post. And I give the Post, again, I give the Washington Post a lot of credit for even putting this article up there. This is not something you would see, I don't believe, in the New York Times. I think the Post has in a lot of ways really become a more, I don't want to say a more progressive newspaper, but a better newspaper in terms of its coverage all in all, in many ways than the New York Times. And so I give it a good deal of kudos for that. So let's see if we can get that slide better. See if I can do this. And I know you like hearing the technology discussion as we move forward. And we're going to talk a little bit more tech too. So let's see, there we go. So this is being debated in San Francisco. Should we have reparations? And $5 million per African American entitled to those reparations. And honestly, I mean, where are you on that? You can make it, I think it's defensible in one way, and we'll get into why it's defensible in a moment. It's not like you can't make an argument that the harm done, I think you can. I think one can make a fair argument that the harm done to individual African Americans over the years of today, right? Because I mean, there's no one alive today who was enslaved, legally enslaved. We do have forms of chattel slave, of wage slavery today. We do have, folks who come to this country who are working in factories or mills or whatever you want to call them, child labor. It's absolutely ugly and wrong, and they should be compensated. But I think you could make an argument. I think you'd lose the argument if you said it's $5 million per African American, because most Americans aren't worth $5 million, aren't worth anything close to it. Most white Americans aren't worth I think it's like $185,000. So it doesn't seem to me that you can make an argument that because damages are supposed to make you whole. They're supposed to put you where you would have been if you hadn't been harmed in the first place, if you hadn't been subject to a tort. Well, you can't, you can't unring the bell, you can't unsqueeze the toothpaste, but you can try to come up with some estimate. And I don't think you could say, but for the harm that we've done to African Americans, that our American society has done, that but for that harm, they would have on average $5 million. It doesn't work. But even if you could say that, even if there was some argument that was in fact the true damage. This creates another winner and loser cycle, like what we're currently undergoing in this country. A few lottery winners. Now, maybe they win the lottery, or maybe they win the genetic lottery and they're born to the right parents. Maybe they're just super lucky. They're super smart. They're both. There's a million different, well, I don't say there's a million. There's a couple of ways, a few ways you can become a billionaire in this country. There's a few ways you can become a multimillionaire in this country. Is this what we want to do? Is say, okay, if you're fortunate enough to have been an African American in San Francisco in 2024, you get $5 million. So conservatives say the proposal would be financially ruinous for the city. And even some reparations advocates dismiss the figure as an unrealistic distraction. What's the logic behind the $5 million? So what the Washington Post points out is in the 60s, city leaders demolished part of the Fillmore district, which was once known as the Harlem of the West. I didn't know that, by the way. It's very interesting. Displacing 883 businesses and 20,000 people, most Black. Decades later, thousands remain displaced, and the neighborhood has turned into a predominantly white enclave of multi-million-dollar homes. So those folks were victims. Those folks should not be displaced. Is the remedy $5 million? If it is for having been displaced, should white people who were displaced get that money too? Should they get less? Should they, how do you balance? This is why ultimately I'm opposed to these type of very inchoate damages. It's inchoate in the sense of how do we value it, right? We don't know how to value it. We can't. We can't even say the harm is identical, because obviously a African-American business owner in the Fillmore district who occupied a particularly desirable lease would be harmed far more than somebody who was a renter who might now have to pay enormous rents regardless of whether they were regardless of whether this displacement had occurred. So it's really, really tough. Now you want to compare this to the Nisei and the Issei and the Japanese immigrants who were interred during World War II. Interned. And the answer is, well, they all suffered one very similar harm. They were locked up in concentration camps for years. And we can't say how much that's worth or how much that isn't, but we can say, okay, you deserve compensation for having been locked up. You faced a unique harm, a unique wrong was done to you. That isn't true for the folks in that Fillmore district. It was not a unique harm. The harms were different depending on what your place was in the Fillmore district. And it wasn't only African Americans. And lots of other people were displaced all over the country at various times to make room for highways and new rebuilding projects. In New York City, Robert Moses, in what was unquestionably racist, decided he was going to build the Cross Bronx Expressway through many working class neighborhoods that, although they weren't wealthy, they had successful businesses, they were where people lived. And there were many were African American, many were not. Many were Italian, Jewish, Latino. Should they all get some form of damages? Should they get millions of dollars, even though that neighborhood, those neighborhoods in the Bronx, in the central Bronx, aren't nearly as high high end in terms of rents and property values as the Fillmore district. How do you make decisions? So lest you think I'm arguing against government action to redress wrongs, not at all. We should absolutely address these wrongs, but what's the right action? And my answer is always, well, let's take individuals and guarantee every single one in this society a safe, secure place to live. Let's guarantee every single individual in this society decent, interesting work with enough vacation time, health care. Then we don't have to look at history, because history tells us all sorts of things and has all manner of victims. And we can go back 1,000 years in England. The descendants of the Saxons, this is true, this has been studied. The descendants of the Saxons who lived in England prior to the Norman invasion in 1066 are still poorer than the descendants of the Normans who invaded. If you have a French name in England, you are probably wealthier now than a person who doesn't have a French name, because if your family's been in England for 1,000 years, because the French took so much, the Normans took so much when they invaded from the Saxons. So is the solution we just take money from people who have Saxon name, Norman names, and give them to people who have Saxon name? What about Saxons who are wealthy? What about the Saxons who are, became successful titans of industry, or are great athletes, or, happen to win a lottery? Do they also deserve recompense? Or does the society have a duty to just guarantee everyone a decent quality of life and nobody too much? It seems to me that's such a better answer. It's also so much less divisive. If you give 20, by the way, and in terms of, I want to get back, this was quite an understatement here. Let me just go back. An unrealistic distraction, financially ruinous. Okay, there are 20,000 people were displaced back in the 60s. There's about 50,000 African Americans in San Francisco. It's a little less than 10% of the population. Let's say we compensate the 20,000 people that we can identify with $5 million. So I try to figure out the math. 5 times 20 is 100. So it's $100,000 million. $100,000 million. That's $100 billion. That's what you'd be looking at. 100,000 million. $100 billion. The city's budget is 14 billion. So yeah, I'd say that's financially ruinous. But you know what we could do? What we could do is we could tax the Bezoses and the Musks who have that $100 billion. Take away 99% of their wealth. They'd still have $1 billion over. And we would have $99 billion to make life better for all poor, struggling, and working class Americans. Isn't that what we should be doing? Isn't that the answer? Isn't that a hell of a lot divisive, distracting? And final point on this, and then I'm going to move on because I got to close out the show. Final point. It doesn't set up a winners losers. You could give 20,000 African Americans in San Francisco $5 million each. Then you have lots who are so poor, right? You'd have lots of African Americans who aren't doing well. And white people too. And I tell you what, they'd be pretty resentful, I think, if their tax money went to some, but not to others. some who are very wealthy, some who have done quite well for themselves, some who are living large. They should also get that 5 million. I don't see that. I just can't. You can't convince me that's a just answer. That's a just solution. It just perpetuates an unjust system with different winners and different losers. That's all it does. But you know why it's being floated? You know why it's getting traction? Because its function is to keep poor, struggling, and working people fighting amongst each other, not joining forces to demand justice. All right, quick stories. Yes, Linux is great. Can't really talk about that right now. But I will say this. I am doing this program on Windows because I can't do it on Linux, but everything else I do on Linux. And it's awesome. And finally, real quick, feel good story, Jimmy Carter. So 98 years old. He's still alive. He's in hospice. A very, very good person, an okay president, a better person, helped make life better for people with the hospice for, not hospice. What was it? Homes for Humanity, Habitat for Humanity, right? Habitat? Is it Habitat? I want to say oldest living U.S. president and a Nobel Peace Prize winner. That would mean more to me being a Nobel Peace Prize winner if we hadn't seen some of the other winners. I think, wasn't Kissinger the war maker? Kind of an irony there. All right, that's going to do it for my program. I got to run. You all have a great afternoon, or if you're on the left coast, enjoy the rest of your morning. I'm going to see if I can get my vision here just a little bit. Remember, Halitics.com, subscribe. Halitics on Facebook, subscribe, like the videos. I'll be back tomorrow. I'll be off Thursday. Have